Here we go.
Welcome to Podcast 360, powered by the Podcast Academy. In 3 questions answered in 60 seconds each, you'll experience a 360-degree view of podcasting from the people who make up the industry. I'm Arielle Nissenblatt, founder of EarBuds Podcast Collective and community marketing manager at Descript. The first season of Podcast 360 featured podcast company founders, including myself, as we interviewed each other about what it takes to build a successful company in this industry. This season, we're putting podcast hosts in the hot seat, who will become the new chain of podcast perspective. I'm your host of the day, though you'll hear my voice throughout the season.
Here we go.
For our first episode, I'm kicking it off by interviewing Toya Coleman, who I am excited now to welcome to the show. Hello, Toya.
Hi, Arielle. I'm so excited to be here. I am Toya, like you already said. I am a podcaster. My podcast is called That Wasn't in My Textbook. It's our bi-weekly podcast that helps us uncover the things we always wish we learned from that boring, bulky textbook. I enjoy doing it. It's a real focus on non-white history and making the history fun and talking about how things in the past connect currently, because history is not just what's happening a long time ago, but we're making history every day.
Something we knew we'd have to bring back this season is the way we start every show, with a round of 2 truths and a lie. You'll provide us with 3 facts about yourself, and I will guess which one is the lie. At the end of our conversation today, you will tell us the correct answer. Are you ready to go with your 2 truths and a lie?
Yes, I've been preparing. I don't know if you can win 2 truths and a lie, but I want to win.
I believe you can.
Okay. My first one is I studied abroad in South Africa for 7 years and had a relationship with my instructor. I was born in a hospital that no longer exists, and I skipped school in 2nd grade.
Like the whole year?
A day.
Just one day. Okay, let's go through those one by one. You studied abroad in South Africa for 7 years?
7 months.
Okay. I'm very off on your timing for this one for some reason. Okay, I am going to say that you studied abroad in South Africa for 7 months. The second one was what?
I was born in a hospital that no longer exists.
Okay. I also was born in a hospital that no longer exists. So I think that that is true. And your third, why can't I remember anything, is that you skipped school in 2nd grade for a day.
Yeah, one day. Yeah.
Okay. So you on purpose decided to skip school as an 8-year-old.
Yes.
I'm going to say the lie is that you did not study abroad for 7 months. You studied abroad for 3 months. So I'm going to go on a technicality.
Okay. And I can't say anything.
No, don't tell me now.
Okay, cool.
Now that we have that taken care of, we're going to learn even more about you, Toya, as I ask you 3 questions related to podcasting, and you'll have 60 seconds to answer each. After that, we'll pick one of the subjects that we covered, and we will revisit it in greater detail, and you can elaborate on any thoughts you want to share. Are you ready for my 3 questions in 60 seconds each?
I think I'm ready.
Here we go.
My first question is this. You have a podcast. It's called That Was Not in My Textbook, and I am a big history person, so I'm always curious about how other people got into their interest in history. So I'd like to hear from you. Why history? What is your background in it?
I studied in college on history. I went to Wesleyan University. I did African American studies. But before that, I think I was already interested in history. I grew up in Harlem when Harlem was very much Black still. It's being gentrified now, like most cities. But I went to elementary and middle school that were led by Black principals and had Black teachers. And I thought everyone was having that experience, but they weren't. And I think it's really rare even now to have a lot of Black teachers in schools. So doing that and having been in these schools by Black principals who wanted to teach students about themselves all year round, that was my early introduction to that. I was singing Lift Every Voice and Sing in the morning. I was doing meditation. I was learning about myself 365. And so I kind of just wanted to replicate that through my podcast. And with 2020, the pandemic, and I think the awakening around race and police brutality, it really inspired me to do a podcast.
Just under the wire, is that right?
Yes. 3 seconds left.
Hell yeah. Good job.
Do I roll over seconds? No, I'm kidding.
My next question for you is, it's so hard to have a podcast that requires research. And yes, you studied history in college, but you're not a PhD in history, are you?
No.
Okay, just confirming.
Yes.
Dr. Toya. And
I would love that.
I wonder, do you ever experience imposter syndrome? And if so, how do you deal with it?
I don't know if I experience imposter syndrome, but one of my deepest fears is saying something wrong or including like inaccurate history or information maybe. And that's a deep fear. And I think that's why I spend so much time like endlessly researching. And I think that's why it's also hard for me to be a weekly podcast. Like I'm bi-weekly. I want to be weekly. My hope is that I can hire a researcher or someone who's like really well versed in it to help me. But yeah, I don't know, like imposter syndrome, but it's like a deep fear of like someone going on Instagram or TikTok and being like, look at this girl, she said this and it is wrong. So yeah, I do have that. And I'm trying to find new ways, like I'm relaunching and I'm trying to find new ways to kind of make it a little bit more current. And so some stuff I'm going to start doing like history of the month at the end of each month where we could talk about like maybe the Drake and Kendrick beef or like whatever happened that month. So I'm going to try to have some pop culture moments that don't take research because we're doing history now.
That's awesome. I love that idea. It also makes it more topical so people can glom onto it. They have to listen to it now. They have to get to the bottom of what's going on.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. My third and my last question for you, Toya, is I would love for you to tell us about the Stony Brook Podcast Fellowship. That's how I think you and I first got introduced. It is a really cool program that I think it's 10 months long. You'll get into it, but I'd love to hear how you first heard about this program, you know, just for folks who might be interested in joining it themselves and how it's changed how you exist in the podcast space.
I heard about the Stony Brook. I think it's the Stony Brook Audio Fellowship Program. I heard about it through like a Google group. I'm in like a Google group for podcasters and someone posted about it. I went to like a digital open house and I was like, okay, I want to do this. This sounds cool. As a podcaster who was interested in going into it professionally, I felt like it was really helpful to me in terms of just learning about the industry, production, even like networking, like how I met you and like other people in the podcast space. And even the people in my class, like they're so amazing. There's people who haven't started podcasts, people who have started podcasts. So I think that's what I love about it. I think it depends. Like if you're already kind of well versed in podcasting, you have to think about your goal. The instructors are amazing. They're a great resource to me. And I feel like it's really helped me even think about how I want to like tell my story and like narration. And I feel like I'm going to step up my game now that I've really kind of had the time to dissect it and do all the things backwards. Like I started my podcast just because I wanted to. And now being in the program, I'm like, okay, who's my audience? All those things that you feel like you never have the time to think about. I was forced to, and it's like structured in a 14-month program to like really flush out your idea.
Okay, that was awesome. We know each other, but it's been great to get to hear your insights in this formal setting. We now have the opportunity to pick one of the topics that we covered and we can go a little deeper on it. Is there anything that you're interested in going back to? I feel like there's a lot to uncover in the Stony Brook program, and that might actually be helpful for a lot of our listeners. Would you care to go in that direction?
Yeah, I would love to talk about the Stony Brook program.
Okay, awesome. Well, tell me about your cohort. Tell me about sort of the structure of the however many weeks it was that you were in this program. Podcast 360 will be back in just a moment. And we're back with Podcast 360.
Yeah, online it says 30 weeks, which I think is about, I think you're right, like 10 months. It's like you meet once a month on a Tuesday, or you meet every Tuesday. It's like every Tuesday for like 30 weeks. So it's like weekly and it's like 3 hours. My cohort is full of so many different people. Some people like me who already have a podcast. There's some people who are starting a podcast. And then there's also some people who just have been in the podcast space like professionally. And for me, my goal was I already had a podcast. So I wanted to kind of strengthen my podcast. I had like a new podcast idea that I wanted to pitch. And then I wanted to learn about the industry. I wanted to kind of like network and learn about that because I'm interested in doing podcast production outside of just my podcast. So I love it. I've learned so much like through the podcast cohort. I got to speak at Podcast Movement. Like one of my classmates was like, oh, I'm doing a panel. Do you want to be on my panel? So that was like really cool. And we had final presentations last week. And then a lot of people went to go see the Yankees game afterwards. So now I feel like, you know, with podcasting, you're kind of like in a silo, like you're at home on a mic. Sometimes you're like in a virtual setting like this. But with the cohort, it felt like I had like colleagues, right? And like people I could talk to and bounce ideas off of. And then the instructors are so amazing and they've been doing podcasting professionally. So they would like allow us to have one-on-ones. They looked over my resume. They're helping me like search for a job. And so it's just been like a really good way to kind of go backwards. Like I just started my podcast because I wanted to and I was inspired, but I never really thought about like who's my audience and like, you know, my metadata, my meta tags on like search engines in the actual platform. So it really kind of gave me a moment to kind of sit back and be like, okay, let me do some of the stuff that I feel like I never have time for. That's very important. And also get like feedback from people. I met you through there. I've met so many other people who have given me free consultations and feedback on my podcast. So it's just been like a really helpful way to like connect with other people and learn. And I really am interested in like even like how I can improve the sound of my podcast, like using music or silence, or like thinking about doing stuff outside, like just like laying tape and learning these terminologies that like I never knew before that are used in professional settings that I can now apply to myself and use moving forward.
Is there one thing, one piece that you learned from this program that you can for sure say you did not know before the program? I love to give really concrete advice to folks that listen to me on podcasts, and I would love to be able to transfer something from your brain to our listeners. One thing that really stands out to you.
That's so hard because I learned so many things, but I think as someone who already had a podcast in the program, I think I learned like I cannot be my target audience. You know what I mean? Like it has to be something beyond that. And so we had a project where we had to like, if you already had a podcast, like I like went on Instagram and was like, if you listen to my podcast, let me talk to you for like 5 minutes and I'll give you like a bookmark or something. And I actually got to speak to people and being like, oh, like now I know the profiles of the different, like there's like 2 or 3 profiles. And I'm like, okay, this is who the people are that listen to my podcast. So now moving forward, when I'm thinking about topics or thinking about new segments, I know that this resonates with these different people that listen to my podcast. And they're not exactly like me. And that's important in order to be successful.
Wanted to ask you about this program because I think it's really great that there are more and more programs like this popping up. I did an audio documentary program in Maine called SALT, where I learned about journalistic ethics and how to produce audio and how to interview and how to find good tape. And I love finding out that there are others like it that exist because it's all in service of growing the podcast space. And I'm really excited to see what you and your cohort do after you officially wrap up I guess last week, right?
Yeah, exactly. Last week. I'm excited. I'm excited to get back into podcasting and apply everything that I've learned. Awesome.
There is just one more thing to do before we wrap up things here. It's time to find out which of your 3 facts is a lie. Remember that from just a few minutes ago? So to recap, my guess was that you did not study abroad in South Africa for 7 months. You studied abroad in South Africa, sure, but not for 7 months. And also there was a juicier part to that fact, and I just didn't even get into it. So I'll let you let us know.
The lie is that I was born in a hospital that no longer exists.
Okay. Tell us more about that.
The hospital I was born in still exists. I just put it in there.
That's a good one. Honestly, it got me. Like I said, the hospital I was born in doesn't exist anymore, so it hit me.
But yeah, I did study abroad for 7 months. I did have a relationship with like my instructor, and I did skip school in 2nd grade. It was a substitute teacher, and he was gullible. So me and my friends were like, we lied and said our babysitter was here.
Wow. So you fully showed up to school. There was a substitute teacher, and you were like, nah, going home.
Yeah.
Good for you.
Me and my friends were like, oh, our babysitters are already here to pick us up early. And he just let us leave.
What did you do with your freedom?
We went to McDonald's.
Good.
It was across the street from the house. And from the school. And my mom, I told on myself because I'm like such an honest person. I was just like, Mom, I have something to tell you. Don't be mad. And she was like, what? I was like, I skipped school today. But she had no idea because it's like we went to McDonald's, went back to like the playground, and then school was let out and our babysitter came and pick me up. So we just were like in the playground. So she didn't really, but I just like, I don't know, I felt guilty. And my mom was just more upset that I was able to do that. Like she was just upset with the school. Like,
How did they let you out?
Yeah, like you just let a student leave a classroom. Like you don't check.
Who is 8 years old?
Yeah, like you don't check to see where's the babysitter. Like what's going on? So yeah, and that's when then she pulled me out of that school after that.
Well, I love these insights. They make up who you are today, which is a wonderful podcast host and a wonderful guest to kick off season 2 of Podcast 360. Can you let our listeners know where they can find you, any social handles, websites, or shout outs that you'd like to give?
Yeah, well, my podcast you can find wherever you listen to podcasts. And that wasn't in my textbook. And then that's also my handle on Instagram. Then my personal handle is Toya from Harlem. I cross promote all the time. So if you look up one, you'll find the other. And we're coming back in June. Right now, we're sharing a lot of classic episodes. We have like the history of Memorial Day coming up because that's coming up. And then, we'll kick off with some fresh new episodes in June. So make sure you subscribe.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to our first episode of season 2 of Podcast 360. And thank you to the Podcast Academy and DCP Entertainment. Follow us on social media at The Ambies and at DCP Official on Instagram, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode.